There is something remarkable about the way human beings understand history. We often imagine the past as a finished puzzle, a collection of dates, discoveries, civilizations, and events that have already been placed in their proper order. We read books, we visit museums, we watch documentaries, and little by little, we begin to believe that the story is complete. But history has never been a finished book. It is an ongoing investigation. Every generation uncovers forgotten cities, deciphers ancient languages, finds manuscripts buried beneath the sand, uses new technology to re-examine objects that have been sitting quietly in museums for decades. Each discovery reminds us of something important. Our understanding of the past is always evolving. This does not mean everything we know is wrong. Far from it. It means knowledge grows by asking better questions. And sometimes, the most powerful discoveries do not come from finding new answers. They come from realizing we have been asking incomplete questions all along. So tonight, rather than asking what history tells us, let's ask something different. What might history still be trying to teach us? That single question opens a door, not into fantasy, but into one of humanity's greatest adventures, the search for understanding, thousands of years apart, separated by oceans, speaking completely different languages. Ancient cultures often wrestled with surprisingly similar questions. Who are we? Why are we here? Can the mind understand reality? What gives life meaning? The answers were different. The symbols were different. The stories were different. Yet the questions endured. The philosophers of Greece searched through reason. Thinkers in Asia explored meditation and self-observation. Ancient scholars in Africa and the Middle East developed sophisticated systems of mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. Each tradition looked through a different window, but many were looking toward the same horizon. This tells us something profound. Curiosity may be one of humanity's oldest shared languages, and perhaps that is why these questions continue to fascinate us today. Not because they have remained unanswered, but because each generation discovers new ways of exploring them. The tools change, the questions remain. Imagine discovering a library hidden beneath the earth. Thousands of manuscripts, hundreds of voices from another era, ideas that no one alive has read for centuries. It sounds like the beginning of an adventure movie. Yet history contains many moments that feel remarkably similar. Entire civilizations have disappeared. Languages have been forgotten. Books have been destroyed by wars, fires, and time itself. But perhaps the greatest loss wasn't the paper. It was the conversations that ended. Every civilization inherits knowledge from those who came before. Then it adds new ideas, corrects old mistakes, questions accepted truths, and passes the result to the next generation. Knowledge is not a monument. It is a relay. Sometimes the baton is passed smoothly. Sometimes it is dropped. When empires collapse, trade routes disappear, universities close, languages stop being spoken, generations lose access to ideas that once seemed ordinary. Centuries later, archaeologists uncover fragments, historians compare texts, scientists analyze forgotten artifacts. Slowly, the conversation begins again. This is one of the most exciting parts of history. Not because the past was perfect, but because every rediscovery reminds us that human understanding has always been incomplete. Perhaps what we call history is less like a finished map, and more like a landscape that is still being explored. Think about a world map from 500 years ago. Entire continents were missing. Oceans ended where imagination began. Empty spaces were filled with drawings of sea monsters, not because people wanted to deceive others, but because that was the limit of what they knew. Knowledge has always expanded this way. Every generation believes it understands the world, until new evidence arrives. The invention of the telescope transformed our understanding of the universe. The microscope revealed invisible worlds living all around us. Modern brain imaging allowed scientists to observe patterns of neural activity that previous generations could only imagine. Each new tool changed more than our answers. It changed the questions we were capable of asking. This is an extraordinary pattern throughout history. Progress rarely happens because people stop asking questions. It happens because they ask better ones. The most influential thinkers were not always those who had the most answers. Often, they were the ones brave enough to challenge assumptions that everyone else accepted. This is not a call to reject established knowledge. Quite the opposite. Science advances by testing ideas against evidence, revising conclusions when stronger evidence appears, and building on what has already been learned. History follows a similar path. Our picture of the past becomes clearer as new discoveries are carefully examined. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson history offers us. Certainty can feel comfortable. Curiosity moves us forward. And maybe, the future belongs to those who remain willing to learn. So far, we have explored how knowledge can be lost, rediscovered, and refined over time. But there is another question hiding beneath the surface. If every generation inherits an incomplete picture of reality, how do our beliefs influence what we choose to preserve, question, or ignore? To answer that, we need to leave the world of ancient civilizations for a moment and look inward, because every society tells stories, but every individual does the same. And sometimes, the stories we inherit shape the way we see the world long before we realize they are there. Long before we ask our first question, the world has already begun answering for us. Before we choose what to believe, we inherit a language, a culture, a family history, a way of interpreting success, failure, time, even happiness. These invisible frameworks become so familiar that we rarely notice them. Imagine two children growing up on opposite sides of the planet. Different traditions, different customs, different ideas about what makes a meaningful life. As adults, they may look at the same event and reach completely different conclusions, not because one is more intelligent than the other, but because each mind learned to organize reality through a different set of stories. Psychologists sometimes describe these internal frameworks as mental models. They help us navigate an incredibly complex world. Without them, every decision would require starting from zero. But every model has limitations. It highlights certain details and quietly pushes others into the background. History works in much the same way. Every generation inherits a collection of stories about the past. Some are confirmed by evidence. Some are revised as new discoveries emerge. Others are replaced entirely. The remarkable part is not that change happens. The remarkable part is that we are capable of changing our minds at all. That ability to update our understanding in light of new evidence may be one of humanity's greatest strengths. And perhaps it is also one of the greatest challenges, because changing our minds often feels like losing certainty, when in reality, it may simply mean getting closer to the truth. If history teaches us anything, it is that curiosity has always been more powerful than certainty. Every major breakthrough began with someone asking a question that others considered unnecessary. Why do the planets move the way they do? What causes disease? How does memory work? What is consciousness? Many of these questions once seemed impossible to answer. Some still are. Yet humanity continued searching. Not because every answer was guaranteed, but because the search itself expanded our understanding. Curiosity is different from skepticism for its own sake. Curiosity does not reject evidence. It seeks it. It welcomes new information, even when that information challenges long-held beliefs. This mindset transformed astronomy, medicine, physics, psychology, and continues shaping neuroscience today. The history of knowledge is not the story of people who were always right. It is the story of people willing to revise what they thought they knew. Perhaps this is why genuine learning often feels uncomfortable. Every new idea asks us to compare it with the old ones. Sometimes the old ideas remain stronger. Sometimes they don't. And that process, though slow, is how understanding grows. The greatest discoveries rarely arrive as complete answers. More often, they begin as better questions. We have traveled through history, explored how knowledge evolves, and reflected on the stories that shape our understanding of the world. But there is one final question. If every generation leaves behind a map for the next, what kind of map are we creating today? Will future generations look back at us the way we look back at those who came before? Will they discover ideas we overlooked, or admire the questions we dared to ask? Perhaps the greatest legacy of human civilization is not any single invention or discovery. Perhaps it is something far simpler, the willingness to keep searching. In the final chapters, we'll bring these ideas together and explore why the pursuit of understanding may be one of the defining characteristics of what it means to be human. When we think about discovery, our minds often travel outward, across oceans, into space, toward distant civilizations, hidden ruins, unknown galaxies. History celebrates explorers who crossed continents, scientists who transformed our understanding of nature, inventors who changed the course of civilization. And rightly so. These achievements reshaped the world. But there is another kind of exploration, one that receives far less attention. The exploration of the human mind itself. For thousands of years, people have tried to understand what it means to think, to remember, to imagine, to dream, to become conscious of being conscious. Unlike a mountain, the mind cannot be mapped with a compass. Unlike a city, it cannot be fully explored by walking through it. Every discovery reveals another mystery. Every answer uncovers another question. Perhaps that is why the study of the human mind remains one of the greatest scientific and philosophical adventures of our time. Because the instrument we use to understand reality is itself one of reality's greatest mysteries. There is an interesting pattern throughout history. Every major breakthrough solved one mystery, only to reveal several new ones. When humanity discovered that Earth orbits the Sun, new questions emerged about the universe. When we learned that microscopic organisms cause many diseases, entire fields of medicine were born. When neuroscience began revealing how billions of neurons communicate, a deeper mystery appeared. How do electrical signals become subjective experience? How does physical activity inside the brain become the feeling of love, the memory of childhood, or the beauty of music? Science has made extraordinary progress, yet consciousness remains one of its greatest open questions. Researchers continue investigating how brain activity relates to conscious experience. Philosophers continue debating what consciousness actually is. Different perspectives coexist, and perhaps that is exactly what makes this field so fascinating. Not because uncertainty is a weakness, but because unanswered questions invite careful exploration. Every generation inherits mysteries and leaves new mysteries behind. Imagine someone living 200 years from now. Looking back at our time, they may admire discoveries that seem ordinary to us today. They may also wonder, why did people believe certain things so confidently? What questions were they afraid to ask? Which assumptions delayed new discoveries? History suggests this has happened before, not because previous generations lacked intelligence, but because every era is limited by the knowledge available to it. Perhaps the same is true for us. The greatest breakthroughs of tomorrow may begin with questions that seem small today. Questions about the brain, about learning, about consciousness, about human cooperation, about the universe itself. Curiosity is not simply a personality trait. It is one of the engines of civilization. Every book, every telescope, every laboratory, every library, every spacecraft, every conversation like this one exists because someone decided that not knowing was a reason to keep searching. At the beginning of this journey, we asked a simple question. What if history remembered only half the story? Perhaps now, the question feels different. History is not simply a record of what happened. It is the story of humanity's growing understanding of itself. Each generation inherits knowledge, tests it, questions it, expands it, then passes it forward. Sometimes we discover forgotten manuscripts. Sometimes we uncover ancient cities. Sometimes we invent entirely new ways of observing the universe. And sometimes, the greatest discovery is realizing that certainty has limits. Knowledge is not a destination. It is a process. The history of civilization is not the history of perfect answers. It is the history of better questions. Perhaps that is what truly connects us to every generation that came before us. The desire to understand, to explore, to learn, to leave the world slightly more understood than we found it. The story of humanity has never belonged to kings alone, or philosophers, or scientists. It belongs to every person who has ever looked at the world and wondered, could there be more to discover? Because there always has been, and there always will be. The next great discovery may not begin in a laboratory or inside an ancient ruin. It may begin with something much quieter. A single question, one that inspires someone to keep searching when everyone else believes the search is over. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoy exploring the intersection of history, science, psychology, and the enduring questions that shape human understanding, subscribe to Senses. Every episode is an invitation to look beyond what is familiar, and to discover how curiosity continues to transform the way we see ourselves and the world. Until next time, keep asking, keep learning, because the story is still being written.